Tell you what, here's how I'm starting off the show today. Maybe it's an upset. This may be an upset. Upset special. Let me tell you, last night, what Jonathan Kuminga did is one of the hardest things you can do as a pro athlete. He's a young player, all right? Not playing all game. You guys aren't playing well. We're down 11 to the Portland Trailblazers with 5 minutes left in the third quarter. You got nothing going. Kuminga hasn't played the whole game, and Steve Kerr goes, go get him. I mean, the bottom line is Jonathan Kuminga could have tried to do too much. He could have tried to ease his way into the game. He could have tried to do a million different things, but whatever he did last night was perfect. It was perfect. He won the game for the Warriors. He won the game for the Warriors after not playing. Evan gets put in, down 11. Hey, go make something happen. And you know what? He made something happen. But he didn't do it by sticking out like a sore thumb. He didn't do it by floating. He did everything right. He let the game come to him to a perfect degree. He took what was given to him and took advantage. We talk a lot about Jonathan Kuminga, and I just felt like today I wanted to start the show by saying, tell you what, this guy delivered last night in a big way.
Well, and I'm glad you want to start with him because I think he's also a symbol for kind of the bigger or broader things that we're going to dig into throughout this show. But you and I were texting during the first half, and it's like, no Kuminga at all. I mean, if first and foremost, the Blazers are a team that you would imagine would be a fit for a Jonathan Kuminga because they're young, they like to run. Last night they're down 2 starters. They're basically playing pickup basketball to start the game. And so you figured at some point we'd see Kuminga in the first half, and we didn't. We didn't see him until, 5 minutes left in the third quarter. For him to do what he did, I don't know if it's his best game in his career. And it might have been 2 games ago in which Steve Kerr, who I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot as well, talked about Jonathan Kuminga's most impressive game. I think that was his most impressive game because I can't recall a time, and look, he was perfect from the floor. He defended without fouling. He gave juice to a team that, quite frankly, was lifeless for most of that game. I mean, they did not look like a team that, by the way, had 3 days of rest, got sunk after blowing a 22-point lead against the Clippers. You'd think that they would come out at home on fire to put away a Portland team that had no business being in that basketball game, but they didn't. And so Steve Kerr threw something at the wall, and it stuck, and it was Kuminga, and he was the reason why they won that basketball game last night. So I thought it was extremely impressive, and I do wonder why it took that to get Kuminga on the floor. I mean, the Warriors are in such a fragile state in which they're trying to figure out whether the veterans still have it, which they didn't for most of last night outside of Curry, or if the young guys deserve to be in. Like, I'm glad Kuminga did what he did, just the way I'm glad that Moses Moody did what he did against Sacramento but didn't get the chance to close. I'm glad Pajemski's done what he's done in recent weeks because they're forcing Steve Kerr to make tough choices. They're forcing Steve Kerr to say these guys have to play. And whether he's gone back on his word sometimes or not, last night was, I think, a defining moment for a kid that we have yet to see make the third-year leap, and I think that's a great step in the right direction.
Well, it's funny because I'm watching that game last night, and at the time I didn't know that Kuminga was going into the game out of the rotation. And the second half rolls along, and it's midway through the third quarter, and I'm thinking, they got to do something with Kuminga. I mean, you can't have Kuminga not playing anymore. It's his third year. If he's not a part of this team by now, and you still think you're sniffing championship aspirations, well, then you got to move him, don't you? I mean, you can't have the kid playing 16, 18 minutes. And so, again, I was just watching the game last night thinking it feels like they have an extra player. When I go down the list of Moody and I think he's earned the right to play more. Moody, Kuminga, Wiggins, Clay, Peyton II. I feel like you're never going to be able to get all those guys going at the same time because nobody's going to be able to play enough minutes consistently because there's too many of those guys, especially if Draymond Green's healthy, playing 30 minutes at the 4. Then how does Peyton, Moody, Kuminga, Thompson, Wiggins how can any of them get any kind of stability with a consistent role? And that's, I think, one thing Steve Kerr's trying to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about, I know we have the sound for it, talking about how it's like a puzzle piece or puzzle pieces right now, and he's got to piece the puzzle together. I mean, and the reason, quite frankly, he has to do it is because there are so many players beyond your number 1. So outside of number 30, who's your best player on a given night? That changes more often than has ever happened during the dynasty for Golden State. More often than Steve Kerr has ever had to deal with.
Yep.
And so now you're looking up and down your roster and you're saying, well, I don't necessarily believe it's hard to play 10 guys, get them in the game. But when he's talking about that, I hear him saying, well, it's hard to your point, Stein, to get guys going if you're playing a 10-man rotation.
Right.
But that's what you're going to have to do. And you're going to have to ride hot hands, and you're going to have to coach with feel, and you're going to have to make decisions that will change night in and night out. And so this isn't going to be a set rotation team. Like, that's not the way these Warriors are going to operate as of now, because at the top of your rotation, those guys have not played up to standard. The Wiggins, the Clays, the Draymonds, the Loonies even, those guys have not been good enough for you to blindly trust them yet, in my opinion, this season. And that's why I think we're seeing Steve Kerr, essentially be forced into a situation for a guy that was, quote unquote, out of the rotation to throw him in the game because last night no one else was playing well.
Yeah, this is Steve Kerr after last night's game talking about rotations, starting lineups, etc.
We talk about it every day. I've really been patient and hoping to get our first unit, from the last couple of years into a good groove. It's just easier to play and to coach when everybody knows exactly where they fit in. Role players, it's easier to play a role when kind of a set rotation and, the stars are playing well and all that. So everything, the puzzle kind of fits. So to be honest, the puzzle hasn't fit this year. And we've had a lot of guys playing well, but we may have to think about, moving the starting lineup around game to game, depending on who we're facing. I'd still prefer to get something solid, but we haven't really established anything this year, and we're a quarter of the way through. So there's definitely a lot of thought that's going to have to go into this.
What do you think he means? 888-957-9570. Warrior fans, what's he mean? He says he may have to start thinking about changes to the starting lineup game to game. Who's he talking about?
Well, it's the first time we've ever heard him.
I agree.
Reference the starting lineup needing to change or possibly changing. Now, he's done it before when he's had to. Like if guys have been out or if they've been hurt. Yeah, if Steph Curry's hurt, Chris Paul is going to start. If Wiggins Draymond earlier in the year wasn't playing because he had an ankle injury when he was suspended, like the starting lineup changes. But when you're just about as close to full strength as possible, I know Gary Payton II is not going to be available for a while, but you're pretty damn close to having your full cast of characters, which is another reason why last night's result or the first 3 quarters of that game was really perplexing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first time I ever heard Steve Kerr saying we're going to have to reevaluate essentially what we have in our starting 5. And the 2 guys that I think he's talking about are Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins.
Yeah. I think that's what's also happening, and that's what I heard Steve Kerr saying. He's saying, I've been saying all year I was going to be patient, and we kind of live and die by the guys who got us a ring, and now it not to the exaggerated extent, but remember the night that Draymond and Gobert got into it. He backed Draymond.
Yep.
And then the next day took some time and said, yeah, Draymond can't do that. He was wrong. I kind of feel like Steve Kerr has been saying he's going to emphasize the veterans, and they got to get Clay and Wiggins to play well to ever think about winning a title, because that's where it all starts. And now I think what I'm starting to hear is he's open to making some changes. I think, to me, the biggest problem that the Warriors have had with his idea of living with the veterans is he's got two guys playing poorly, Wiggins and Clay. If it were just one of those two guys, I think you could be more patient. But neither of them is playing well at all. And because they're both such big parts of the team, you can't have both those guys ineffectual. And so he's going to have to, I think what he's talking about is maybe make a decision on one of them now, maybe, or at least at some point for some games. I think you're right. I think we're talking about Wiggins and or Clay. Well,
and the reason I didn't put Looney in there, because he does start, but on a given night, he could play 10 minutes or 20 minutes. Like, he's generally not in the closing lineup, which is kind of the next part that Kerr talked about. But going back to the starting lineup, I think, and one of the reasons why he's now being forced into this spot, and I don't know how much credit people want to give Steve Kerr. To me, it's more about, I give a lot of credit to a Jonathan Kuminga, a Moses Moody, to more of an extent, a Brandon Podziemski, for forcing their way in. Like, I think a reason why Steve Kerr was always willing to live and die with the veterans going back to last season was because there wasn't really a guy that stepped up in the way that a Jonathan Kuminga stepped up last night. There wasn't a guy that he threw into the game and took over the game that forced him to reevaluate what he has in his starting five outside of Steph Curry. Now, that's starting to happen, and I think it's starting to happen because of how good these younger players have played. They've played better, quite frankly. Like, that's one of the reasons why the Warriors are a sub-500 team, but roughly a 500 basketball team, is because on any given night, Sonny, I can't tell you which unit is going to be better, the first or the second unit. And that, to me, is a problem that creates a lack of clarity, which Steve Kerr is clearly talking about. And that's why it sounds like, to me, if we're just a little over a quarter way through the season, I know it's still technically young, but if you are actually going to figure out your rotation, and I think that's an important thing going into, say, the postseason, but if you're going to figure that out, you got to start doing it now. And so Steve Kerr, I do think, is going back to the drawing board because these young kids are forcing him to.
Yeah, I think, and not to disagree, because I agree. I think because we know who Steve Kerr is, and that is somebody who's willing to lean on the veterans, I do think I think the bigger reason that the young guys have played, to me, is more because the veterans have really been bad, as opposed to the young players have knocked our socks off.
I'm saying they're outplaying the veterans.
No doubt.
Like last night, Kuminga outplayed Wiggins. He outplayed Clay. That's why he finished the game.
Yeah, all I'm saying is if Clay and Wiggins were playing any better, they would get first dibs on all the playing time.
True.
And the fact that they're not playing well has now opened up the door for a lot of these younger players. But how long can you? Who do you pick? Who goes to the bench? Wiggins? You know, the other guy I'm a little worried about right now is Looney. I mean, if I didn't know any better, I'd think Looney was as old as the big three. You know what I mean? Like, it feels like he's playing older than he really is. So I'm a little worried about Looney, too.
There's a lot of miles on all five of them. Like, I know Wiggins is 29 years old, but it's his 10th season in the league. Kevon Looney came into the NBA as a 19-year-old, to your point. I mean, these guys have a lot of miles. Kevon Looney hasn't missed a game in, 3 years? I mean, I'm assuming that takes somewhat of a toll on you. I do wonder, though, and this is another part of this, I'm sure Steve Kerr is going to have to figure out, but if he still believes that the veterans give them the best chance to compete for a championship, then I do think we are going to see him continue to give them rope, because the potential in his mind of them playing their best basketball versus the potential of the young guys playing their best basketball is probably it's going to be the starting five.
Right.
But with how poorly some of these guys are playing on a relatively consistent basis, then I do think you have to ask the question of who gives you a higher ceiling in certain positions against certain teams.
Right.
Like last night, I think the Warriors trotted out their best potential closing lineup if you're talking about offense and defense. And I believe it was Curry, Clay, Wiggins, Draymond, Kuminga. Now, there might be an interchangeable piece here and there, but I think if you're looking for length, if you're looking for athleticism, if you're looking for defense and an offense that can close out a game, like that to me is the group that gives you the highest ceiling. And of course, then you got to wonder, are they going to produce like that each and every night? They put away the Blazers, but can they put away on Friday an Oklahoma City team?
Right.
And follow that up against the Clippers, who just came back from down 20? Like, these are questions that we're going to not have answers for, I think, for quite a while. But I wonder what people want to see in that direction from the head coach.